Welcome and to our next installment of Parshat Re'eh, and I'm going to turn to make the bracha, and then I will give us the text. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
Here we are. So we were actually in the middle of Rashi. And here we go. So it was saying, remember, we got into a little bit of a discussion about the destruction of all the places where there was idolatry being practiced in the land of Israel. So it kol hamakomot, all the places asher avdu sham, where they worshipped. In other words, the people who inhabited the land formerly. Uma ta'abdun mehem. Okay, and what should you destroy from them? Et Elohehem asher al ha'arim, their gods which are on the mountains. So it's interesting that what Rashi seems to be saying here is that it's specifically the idols that need to be smashed, not necessarily the buildings. At least that's what this seems to be saying here. So let's go on. I mean, there's a lot of rabbinic material, I can tell you. There's a whole tractate called Avodah Zarah in the Talmud that discusses these particular matters and the degree to which idolatry is absolutely anathema. So, but that's what it sounds like here, that you don't necessarily have to destroy the temple, but rather the idols themselves. So if that's what Rashi means here, I leave it as a question because it does need clarification. So we'll go on to the next verse. Okay. V'nitatztem it. So well, here we go. So this is going to clarify that right now, right? V'nitatztem et mizbechotam. So this is you shall crush, destroy. Again, these are all synonyms for destruction, right? That they're altars, right? You shall break them apart. V'shibartem et matzevotam, and again, you shall destroy their pillars. Now, these I assume these are pillars that were used in the actual practice of worship. For Asherehem, so we believe there was, of course, a Canaanite deity Asherah, but here it's translated as sacred posts. Tisrafun ba'esh, you shall burn in fire. Upsile Elohehem, and the sculptured image of their gods, Tigadeun, you should cut down. So all these repeated synonyms and phrases talking about the need to destroy the idols. And again, I'll finish the sentence, V'ibadatem et shmam, and you should destroy their names. Min hamakom, from the place, lost one word, hahu, from that place. So anathema, that's what we're talking about here. And again, just to re-emphasize, it's a point that's been made before, that this all appears to be iconoclasm. It's all got to do with fetishism. And yet idolatry is really something else. But this is the result of idolatry, right? Or the part of what's involved in the practice of idolatry. And we're being asked, the Jewish people is being asked to, when it says, serve the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might, it is not exaggerating that. That's not hyperbole. That is something that obviously you constantly have to work towards. It's not something that you can stand back and say, yeah, I just did that. I'm sorry, Harlan, did you say something?
Yeah, I was going to say that
we will not worship God in different places like they do. Eventually, we're going to have to worship Him in a one place only, in a temple.
Well, when we say
That's what the other nations were doing. They worship different places.
yeah. Well, in this particular case, that is not the point, though, Harlan. That point is made elsewhere. That is the unification of the place of worship, meaning the temple. It doesn't mean
Right.
we don't worship God anywhere else. Obviously, we're supposed to worship God wherever we are, but the specific form that the worship takes place in that particular regard with respect to sacrifices and that whole formal process could only take place ultimately in the temple in Jerusalem. And of course, this is all to emphasize the unity of God, that there is only one. So that notion of this ultimate, the sole, single, indivisible, ultimate source of all creation is being emphasized in every which way. So here we go with Rashi explaining some of the words here, right? Mizbeach. So he explains that a mizbeach, mentioned mizbechotam, means shel avanim harbe, that it's made up of many stones, whereas a matzeva, which is we translated as pillars, a matzeva is also an altar, but it's shel even achat, it's of one stone. Vehi bimus, altar, there's the Yiddish word there, right, for altar. So there's a difference between a mizbeach, which is composed of a whole bunch of stones, and a matzeva, which is a single altar. It's a single piece. Shishnuya b'Mishnah, and he says this word bimus that's mentioned in the Mishnah. And there's this tractate that I mentioned, Avodah Zara, right? The tractate Avodah Zara, Mem Zayin 47. Even, right? So here we go. A further clarification. Even shechatzva mitchilata lebimus. He says this is a stone that was hewn from the very beginning for the sake of an altar, as an altar, a bimus. Asherah. So he says an Asherah, we translated it as sacred posts. Rashi tells us it's Ilan HaNe'ebad. We're talking about a tree that is worshipped, an Asherah. The Ibadatem et Shmam, you shall destroy their names, right? You shall cause their names to be destroyed. So he says that the way in which you do that, the practical application of that mitzvah is lechanot lahem shem legnai. That is to say that when you make reference to their idols, it should involve something that's insulting, something that's obnoxious. And I believe he's going to give you examples. So Beit Galia, right? A Beit Galia, which means a sublime house. Korin la Beit Karia. So you notice that the Galia is substituted, Karia is substituted for it, which means a base house. So instead of a sublime house, you refer to it as a base house, right? Ayin kol, right? Either it means it could mean an eye, right? It could also refer to, I don't know if you have, like a word ma'ayan has to do with a well or a source. So it perhaps could mean the source of everything, and kol becomes kotz, which is a thorn. So it could be the eye of all, could be the eye of a thorn. So that's the way in which you destroy their names, quite literally. Okay. Lo ta'asun kain. Okay. This, you shall not do such practice, Lashem Elokechem, to the Lord your God. So you have to treat God in absolutely the opposite way, and Rashi's going to explain this. I mean, this is all in many senses begging explanation, right? So, Lord ta'asun kain, you shall not practice in this way. Lahaktir l'shamayim. So this, Harlan, this is the point that you were making, right? So here it is, to offer incense, that's what this means, l'shamayim, to the heavens, b'chol makom, in every single location. Ki im b'makom asher yivchar, but only in the place which he chooses, which is the point you were making, Harlan. Davar acher. So Rashi goes into another alternative interpretation. V'nitatztem et mizbechotam, right? You shall tear apart their altars. V'ibadatam et shmam, and you shall destroy their names. Lo tasun kain, you shall not do thus, putting all these things together. So in the
destroying their name is one of the things that God wanted, because if you destroy somebody's name, he's never again noted anymore. That's wonderful, because that's what's happened to a lot of nations. You destroy their name, so that their beneficiaries will never know anymore.
Mm-hmm.
That's very important, to destroy their name.
So Rash, and of course, when you do that, even when you start to do that, it's just like if you destroy someone's name, there's always that little something hanging around, which is why it's so terrible, why bad-mouthing someone is so awful. At any rate, so Rashi gave us an alternative interpretation of that, but now he's pulling all these things together. And the Sifrei says, this is this early commentary, this midrash, halachic midrash on Numbers and Deuteronomy. He says, azara, you should not do such. In other words, here we're talking about destroying and wiping out and stuff, and then it says, you shall not do this. And this is a warning, an azhara, right? Lemochek et Hashem. The opposite would be to blot out God's name. In other words, that's why when you erase the name of God, you're not allowed to, if you can't take an eraser and erase it, which is why we're very careful about Shemot. You're familiar with that, where we bury books where God's name is written. Now you know the actual source of this practice, right? Also, if a scribe writes the name of God underneath, in a Sefer Torah, he can't take and erase what he wrote, and he has to take a blade and very carefully remove that from the scroll, so that if he writes the name of God in a wrong place and he left out a word or something, he cannot just simply erase it. Wait,
does he have to dispose of it in some special manner, or
yes.
What do they do?
I would imagine, I don't know all the laws of scribal work, but I would think that it would have to be buried. That's
okay.
what I think.
Got it. Thank you.
So there's that one point, and another example is lintots even min hazbizbeach, or to remove a stone from the altar, or min ha'azara, or from the temple courtyard. In other words, the fact that you have this negative commandment following, thou shalt not do the same, right after these positive commandments to destroy, right, is what's being brought out here. Amar Rabbi Yishmael, said Rabbi Yishmael, V'chi ta'aleh al da'atcha, would you even imagine she Yisrael notzin et mizbachot? Why would you need such a commandment? This such a derivation as has just been mentioned. Why would you even think that an Israelite would do such a thing? Ela shelo ta'asu k'ma'asehem. But what this is really coming to tell us is not to involve ourselves in similar kinds of practices.
I think the Israelites, when they get settled in Israel, they'll forget God. And that's what he's trying to say. Don't forget me, even though you're settled and you got all kinds of problems. Don't forget me.
Yes, and this is being specific in terms of that application. But here, Rabbi Yishmael is trying to derive something further. So you're going to see in a moment where he's going on this. So we had a derivation that said that the point of this one of the takeaways from this particular verse is that you shouldn't remove a stone from the altar. And Rabbi Yishmael is saying, since when would you even consider such a thing? Why would a Jew even consider doing that? Even if they, were practicing idolatry, would they be doing such a thing? I think it's the point that under no circumstances would they do that, even if they weren't being faithful. So he says, what it's really coming to tell you is that you shouldn't have similar practices. Ve'yigremu avonotechem lamikdash avotechem sheyecharev. So that if you do the similar point here is that if you do the kinds of base and immoral behavior that they practice, in other words, it's speaking more metaphorically, that if in fact you go and start practicing their levels of immorality, okay, if you do that, your sins, avonotechem, will cause la mikdash avotechem, that the sanctuary of your ancestors, sheyecharev, will be destroyed. And that's the removing the stones from the altar. In other words, that if you act, it's a very powerful drush here, that he's saying, don't look at it literally as removing stones from the altar, but see it rather as saying, if you start to behave in that immoral, disgusting way that these people are behaving, it'll cause the sanctuary to be destroyed. And that is the removal of the stones of the altar.
I was wondering if during the travel into the wilderness, all the tribes were told there was a central place where the Mishka was, that they worshiped, with the priests. And I imagine that's going to be the same way when they reach Israel, when Joshua conquers Israel. They're going to have a central place where they're going to worship again.
So I would have to give you a rabbinic answer by saying yes and no. So on the one hand, there was a main shrine in Shiloh, and I think in Bethel, and maybe another place as well.
Wasn't there supposedly one in every tribal location or something, so that they could have something there where they could gather?
So I'm going to explain that.
Okay.
So while there was one central shrine, they were still allowed to build altars in the various locations, not necessarily one to a tribe, but I would say that, in every significant town or location, they were allowed to build local shrines where they could bring offerings. I think that, there's a lot, again, there's just so much information out there. And I think basically they would bring at that time just whole offerings, or lot. I think those were the offerings that were brought in these shrines. But once King Solomon built the temple in Jerusalem, it was only at that point, but it was at that point that when the temple was built in Jerusalem, the worship at those shrines was now forbidden. Now, this was a big change. And so you read in the book of Kings, the attempt to destroy these local shrines where they were worshiping God. It wasn't that they were worshiping idols, but the fact that now that the temple had been built, this was the final, so to speak, resting place. Those local shrines were now forbidden. And there was a lot of difficulty. There's many comments within the book of Kings where they talk about, that while they worship God, nevertheless, they continue to go to these shrines. So,
Sure.
so
I can see why they would do that for
well,
many reasons.
well, as
Travel is tough.
of course, and as has been said, it's very hard to get a system out of your system. So
Yeah.
that was going on there. One more verse for today. Ki im el hamakom, but to the place, asher yivchar Hashem Elokechem, which the Lord your God will choose, mikol shiftechem, from all your tribes, lashum, I think it, yeah, okay, I guess. I would think that this might be a misprint, okay? I think it's lasu from the word sim, but maybe lashum. That's what it says, right? Et shemo sham, to place his name there, or to cause his name. If it is a verb, made out of the noun shame, then it's to, somehow to make his name known there. Okay. V'yeshichno tidroshu, to his presence. This is the Shekhinah, right? You shall seek out, you shall seek, uva tashama, and you shall come there. So now it's talking about the centralization of
Does that mean that God's name is there, but God is not there? He's in heaven, but
Well,
his name is there?
I think that the idea of God being present everywhere is a subtle, but important concept. And it's as if his presence is concentrated there. And you might also look at it as a funnel, right? Or a conduit, that the temple is a conduit by which the divine presence that is celestial is brought down into the world. That's in a sense the dynamic that's going on there. And that, of course, we know, and this has been again mentioned numbers of times, how that when you look at the conjunction of Asia, Europe, and Africa, Jerusalem is like the very center location of it. It's like the axis of it all. And so that's another reason why Jerusalem was chosen as this place from which the divine presence then would emanate into the world. So let me do, we can do a little Rashi here, right? Leshichno tidroshu, or tidrashu, you shall seek out his presence. And he says, look at this, so interesting. He doesn't say this is the temple. He says, Ze Mishkan Shiloh. He says this is a reference to the sanctuary or the shrine in Shiloh. So that's interesting, right? That he is not referring here to the temple, which is what I had thought to begin. But nevertheless, the shrines were permitted during these, they were called bamot, high places, and they were still permitted during the time of Shiloh, and as I said, up until the time of King Solomon. So a very interesting and helpful Rashi that when it says you shall seek out his presence is a reference actually to the first, the shrine that was in Shiloh.
Well, isn't that where they put all the stuff?
Yes.
Yes, the Mishkan.
Correct. That's
there. I mean, so yes,
right.
that makes sense, because you can't break up the tablets and take them all over the
exactly. No.
Right.
But you have the ark and the altars, etc. Correct.
Right. Okay.
Okay. We're going to stop here. So I'm going to stop the share and stop the recording, and hope to have a chance to continue this tomorrow.